Hello, everyone. Happy New Year and happy 2025. Welcome to a presentation that is part of our virtual conference for NYSTRA. We're very excited to have you join us as you earn your CEUs this year. My name is Tara Loyash. I'm a board member with NYSTRA, and I'm also an associate professor at Southern Connecticut State University, and also the grad program coordinator for the recreation therapy program. So today, what we'll be doing is talking about age bias in practice. And this is something that we may not think too much about. We hear about bias pretty often as it's related to probably gender, sex, or race. But today we're going to focus on age. And something that's really interesting about age is that all of us are probably at some point going to work with someone who's older. So even if you aren't specializing in working with older adults, more than likely you're coming into contact with clients who are reaching old age, or even family members, older adults that are taking care of younger children as well, even grandparents. So this is great information to have, and it really doesn't matter which population you are focusing on in your practice. All right, so let's chat a little bit about what we're going to do today. So we're going to first define ageism. What exactly is it? Kind of dig deep into what that term really means, and then also how that impacts our own interactions, right? Our own bias, our implicit bias, which is our session objective number 2. What does age bias and maybe discrimination, how does that impact our interactions with our clients? So all of us have implicit bias. So implicit bias is bias that we're not really aware of. So it may be things, the type of bias that has developed based on learned behaviors, where we were raised. We all know that we weren't raised the same way or in the same area. Maybe things that we're not even really aware of. So that's why it's also important to reflect, our number 3 objective. So we're reflecting on our personal behavior, but also professional. And a lot of times, I will say there aren't people out there that are outwardly, explicitly biased towards older adults. Definitely not. But there could be some things that we're doing that really encourage some of these stereotypes and myths surrounding age. So we're going to look at that on a personal level, also a professional level. And then number 4, we are going to identify some different programming strategies that are going to really help with dismantling ageism where you're working, right? And again, it could be where you're working, your personal life, any of those things. All right, so first a test, all right, and test as in no one's getting graded. This is all something for your benefit. So there should be some supplemental material that's available to you. Our expectations regarding aging test, and I'm actually going to share that on my screen really quick. Here we go. All right. All right, so you should have access to this. All right, and this is just 12 items that you're going to be answering. All right, so take some time, even pause the presentation, and answer the questions. All right, so there's different statements that are given to you, and then you check whether it's definitely true, somewhat false, or definitely false. And later on, we're going to chat about how you can calculate your score as well. So take some time. All right, so there are 12 questions. All right, and be as honest as possible. So no one is, you're not sharing this with anyone unless you want to share it with someone. You don't need to send it to me. Definitely not. So again, pause the presentation, take some time to answer those questions in that supplemental material, and then we will discuss later on. Okay, all right. So hopefully you have taken some time to complete the expectations regarding aging quiz, that little 12 question quiz. All right, and we will get back to that. So since we're already talking about aging, or you started answering questions about aging, think about how you feel about aging, right? Even for yourself. And this is where kind of our implicit beliefs come in. So these are some great statements to finish. And what's key with these is to not think so long about answering them, right? So what is your first impression? So when I am old, I what, right? What's the first thing that comes to mind? Growing old means what? I think sometimes we censor ourselves. I've seen that certainly in my classes, where students maybe have to take a minute to think of something positive, when really the initial reaction is something negative. When I am old, I won't be able to do X, Y, and Z. Growing old means slowing down. The older I become, the crankier I become. All right, those are some examples of the kind of the first thing that individuals think of. Certainly not all of them are negative, right? So old people never have to work, right? An older person is considered old when they feel old. So there are some individuals that do have more positive reactions. But what's really important with this exercise is to really think about, what comes first, right? What's that initial reaction to these different statements? And if they are negative, then why, right? For me, I've worked with older adults close to 18 years. So before I entered higher education, I was working in long-term care. I was head of recreation departments. As part of leadership teams. I really enjoyed working with older adults. And through some research that I did, I became aware of implicit bias that I had. So I was kind of separating myself from the clients that I was working with, and I really didn't have many positive reactions to growing old. So if I were to answer these questions, it could be growing old means slowing down, or it means requiring more help. Independence as it's related to having a successful life is actually a really interesting topic too. When we think about, how much independence really is required for us to feel as though we are contributing. So what's really important about these questions is to ask yourself if they are negative, those initial reactions, and why, right? And again, there's a lot of us that enjoy working with older adults that, have made a career of that, and that, certainly we can still harbor some implicit bias with that. All right, and as an example, all right, so let's chat about birthdays. So I want you to think about different birthday milestones that you've had, right? So think about when you were, turning double digits, when you were turning 10, how excited you were, right? Or maybe it's 15 or 16, right? So maybe it's, being excited to have a driver's license, even 18, being considered an adult, or 21, right? So you're able to go out and have a drink. 21 is usually a big milestone. And now think about when you turn 30, or if you're about to turn 30, or thinking about in the future of turning 30, how do you feel about that? Think about the cards that are out there. If you kind of go down the aisle of a card store and look at different milestone birthdays, I would say 10 to 21, we've got some really fun cards out there, right? But once you hit 30, and think about 40, 50, 60, 70, what do those cards look like? Are they making fun of aging, right? Are there stereotypes that are part of those cards? Not being able to see, not being able to hear, why all of a sudden at 30, which is fairly young, are we seeing these types of greeting cards that don't really promote aging as something that's to be, celebrated, right? When we think about it. Last year, I was invited to a birthday party, And um, I walked into the restaurant and they had all different decorations up. And there were hazard cones. The birthday guy had a cane. It was, beware aging, aging zone, things like that. And if you want to guess his age, you might think, oh, that's, maybe 50 or 60. And he was 30. He was turning 30. So why at such a young age, right? 30, and I can say probably 30 is a young age because I'm older than 30. Why are we, having these negative perceptions of getting older? What is that about? We're going to dive a little bit more into that. Another question associated with that is, at what age are you old? So when are we old? And normally if we were in person, I'd ask everyone to shout an age. What is old? And in my classes, students could say 30 is old, 40 is old, some say 100, some say maybe 50 or 60, and they relate that to when you can retire, right? That's when you're old. So everyone has a different perception of what old age is, and that could change as we age. So that's what's important to really think about. So age really has a lot to do with our perception. So what are we exposed to when we're younger? What are the expectations of growing older, which you had questions in your survey to answer about that. There isn't an age where we are considered old. So we don't have an age, you hit this age and that's it, you're officially old. So we have the World Health Organization that says when you turn 65, that's when you're older, right? That's usually what's tied to, benefits and also retirement, things like that. So we have 65, but that's really the only guideline we have. So it's really based on perception, because there's individuals that would think 65 isn't old, right? We have a lot of individuals that are living longer now. So 65 really, isn't that old when we think about that. So perception really has a lot to do with it. And perception based on gender as well. So, women can think that old age starts, a little bit older than maybe men, right? And that was a survey that was done in the United States, right? So women thought that 61 was when our old age started, and then men were identifying 56 as the start of old age. So again, it's going to depend on what you're exposed to, what your beliefs are, and also your values, right? And that is changing as you age. So again, when you turn 10, you turn double digits and you're feeling really good. Someone who's 20, they were old to you, right? You turn 20 and you're like, maybe thinking I'm not old. Someone who's 40 is old. You turn 40, right? And on and on and on. So that perception really changes. And we're going to talk about why maybe when we're younger, right? Children feel that certain types of what they're seeing is indication of old age. We'll get more into that in a little bit. All right, so let's dive a little bit into the aging population. So we have a growing segment of individuals that are older than 65, right? Or baby boomers. It's a huge generation, right? So we're expecting them to be older than 65, right, by 2030. So that's really going to expand the size of our older adult population, right? So 1 in every 5 residents, right, or individuals, they're going to be at retirement age. And 1 in 3 people turning 65, they're going to require some type of care, right? So nursing home care, and maybe it is, not permanent, but, we're looking at assisted living care as well, right? So for those of you that are working specifically with older adults and specializing in that area, there is job security associated with working with older adults. We have this huge segment of individuals. We also have a larger group of individuals that are 85 and older that is growing. So we really have a difference with our older adult population as far as needs. So if we're thinking that 65, so let's use 65, because that's what the WHO is saying is when we reach old age, right? Can we say someone who's 65 has the same needs or has the same abilities as someone who is 85 or older, right? We're looking at that 20-year difference? Certainly not, right? Someone who's 65 could potentially be more active or have different interests than someone who is 85, right? So those needs are really different. So if we're looking at individuals that are, say, 65 and older, which, I mean, older adults, right, even our AARP benefits could start at like 50, 55. So if we're looking at that gap, say someone could live to be 100, that's a huge span of years, right? So certainly our 50-year-olds, 65-year-olds are not going to have the same needs as a 90-year-old. So generally this segment of older adults, I usually refer to as long-living adults because it's different, right? We're grouping all these older adults together, yet they have different needs, right? It would really help us if we were able to kind of pull apart smaller segments within that older adult population. And when we even think about that population and the medical needs that are required for someone who's 65 versus someone who's 90, again, that is different. We have geriatricians who are serving those individuals. That's a very large span of years. And when we think about children who are considered children 0 to 18, that's only 18 years. We're looking at 20 or more years, or significantly more than 20 years for our older adult population. Yet we don't have enough geriatricians for our older adult population. We have plenty of pediatricians, but we do not have enough geriatricians. It's expected that we'll need probably 30,000 more by 2030. So again, job security, if anyone is interested in really, focusing on the needs of older adults. All right, so let's move into ageism, right? What exactly it is. So ageism, it was a term that was coined in 1968, which isn't too long ago. Especially when we consider the other isms that are out there. It's something that's, I want to say, at least to me, feels fairly new. So what's interesting about ageism, as it was a term to describe discrimination against older people, is really a universal experience, aging in general, right? So we might not all be able to experience the same race or same ethnicity or same gender identity. But we, if everything goes smoothly as planned, we are all going to age, right? It's a universal experience. So why are we even, experiencing ageism, right? So we can't really say, we don't know I guess when you're younger, you don't really know the experiences of older adults, but you can probably count on the fact that you're going to be older. So that makes ageism really unique compared to racism, sexism, homophobia, those other isms. Okay, so ageism, it's focused on, what we think, again, that implicit bias, but also some explicit bias as well, right? How we're feeling, right? Any prejudice that we have, and then how we're acting, right? That discrimination towards others, right? Based on their age. So this is, again, where we can reflect, do we have certain thoughts, based on individuals that are older, right? Are they positive? Are they negative? And what are your experiences with older adults? Is it just with the older adults that you've worked with? Is it people that you know in your life? Or maybe there aren't, you haven't experienced a relationship with an older adult. That can also, certainly impact how you feel about aging and your own aging. Okay, so COVID-19 really had an impact on ageism, especially in healthcare. So we saw a huge increase in ageism in literature that focused on ageism since 2019. So there wasn't much happening. We hit 2019, and then there was kind of a boom with that. There were, since 2021, or before 2021, right, or 2020, there were 21 publications that addressed ageism during the pandemic. And that's just during the pandemic. So since then, there's certainly been more. We discovered there really was a lack of preparedness for COVID-19 across the board, but even more so for nursing homes and long-term care facilities. We saw nursing homes, kind of in a way get left behind as far as being able to provide, PPE, provide different resources that are needed. Generally, all of that went to hospitals. So our nursing homes really, there was lacking, and we saw the impact of that, certainly. We had a lot of protocols that are based solely on age, which is also very interesting because in keeping people safe, really those protocols were for everyone. But specifically in nursing homes, individuals weren't, family members weren't able to visit individuals. We had residents that were passing away, and because of these protocols, outside individuals weren't, loved ones weren't able to come in. And it was an attempt to really keep people safe, right? So it's not just, our protocols weren't there to cause anyone pain. They certainly weren't there, to separate family members. That's what ended up happening. And that's mostly due to an increase in compassionate ageism. Some of you may not have heard this term, and don't get tricked by the name a little bit, right? Because having compassion, that's really important, especially in our profession. But this is kind of a negative side effect to that, of this need to protect. So compassionate ageism, it's a belief that our older adults are needy, right? Just because they're older based on their age. And they deserve special policies to help them, which we have in place, right? So older adults generally are considered a vulnerable population, especially if they're in a nursing home. But this is the belief, and if you worked in a nursing home, you know that there's some that, definitely aren't that vulnerable. That it's the belief that just based on your age, right, you need these special policies, that you're at risk of X, Y, and Z. So it doesn't take into account the individuality of each person, right? And because of that, it can be really disempowering to those who are older, right? It could be patronizing. I need to take care of you because you are older. So it really has this potential to see all older adults as victims of the aging process, right? And growing older, right? So how many times do we feel bad for someone because they're older? How many times do we feel bad for someone because they need to use a walker or because they're in a wheelchair, right? So these are some of the ideas that contribute to ageism, specifically compassionate ageism. All right, so I worked with some individuals to conduct a study specifically on caregiving and ageism, and it just happened to coincide during COVID-19. And we got some really interesting results. And I'm currently working on a new theory of caregiving that kind of dives deep into validation reward, right? So what are the relationship between the caregiver and the care receiver, right, specifically in long-term care, and what is the reward that they receive, right? What are they looking at for out of that relationship? Certainly, because there's certain types of people that enjoy working with older adults, and what is the gain, right, from that relationship? And after interviewing different caregivers, professional caregivers that were working in long-term care during COVID-19, there were different areas that popped up. So compassionate ageism was one, right? So they feared for the people they were caring for. They felt these individuals were vulnerable, and they felt that they needed to be protected. And certainly there are individuals in long-term care where that is the case. But that doesn't mean that that would, encompass all individuals just because they are in long-term care. Identity, right, was a big part for individuals, right? So part of their identity was being a caregiver, right? That's who they were. They considered themselves compassionate. They loved what they do. They loved their residents. I cannot say that, I interviewed anyone who did not like the residents that they cared for. Certainly not. These were people who, were very committed to the individuals that they were working with. But there was also this kind of detachment from aging specifically. So they enjoyed their work. They enjoyed working with, the individuals that they were caring for. But when asked about their own aging, none of them expected to be in a nursing home. They didn't want to do it. And we started talking about nursing homes and how they were, they felt they were depressing and, all these kind of negative thoughts, but they enjoyed working there. So there's really this detachment, this disconnect between their own aging experience and the individuals that were older that they were caring for. And they placed, definitely value in the relationships that they had with these older adults. And of course, as you might think, their favorite resident was the one who, it wasn't difficult to care for them. They listened to them. They let them, care for them. They weren't, difficult. We always know there's some difficult residents. So, how are the perceptions, how we feel about others, how is the caring relationship impacting that? And then also ableism was a part of this. So, gender, a lot of individuals expected men to be more needy, to need more assistance, where, they were almost resentful of women who might need the same amount of assistance, right? So they expected women to be able to do more for themselves, which is very interesting. And along with that was, our functional decline. They perceived that someone's quality of life declined when their independence declined as well, which we know isn't necessarily the case for individuals, right? So there can be certainly instances where that's why we adapt so much in our profession, where we can help individuals be more independent, but then it doesn't mean that if you're dependent on someone that your quality of life has decreased. So all of this kind of pointed towards this validation and reward, right? So what type, depending on the person who was caring for the older adults, they're really seeking this validation of, doing a good job. And the reward is this relationship that they would have with the individual. So our perceptions of aging and also ageism are impacting the people that we're caring for, essentially. And, this is unique as that there's a power imbalance. There always will be. These individuals are dependent on caregivers to do very intimate, things for them and to assist them. So, are we expecting certain things from individuals, not realizing it, right? While we're caring for them in order to have this type of relationship. All right, so let's move on to ageism in healthcare. What are some examples? And you might have your own examples as well. So one that's really, and actually I see a lot, and I did when I was younger, is elder speak. So I always talk to my students about elder speak. So that's when we, go to speak to someone who's older, and our voice, the pitch of our voice goes up, maybe, the same as if we were talking to somebody younger. Maybe you're referring to someone as, they're so cute, right? Oh, she's so adorable. I love her so much. She's so cute. Maybe we are, again, kind of speaking down to them in a way. And I think, we're kind of infantiling them. So seeing them as maybe a baby to care for, right, in the same way. So maybe they do need assistance, yes, but they certainly are not infants. They have had all of these different life experiences, right? So how often are we doing that? Okay, that's an example. I think that's probably the most common. Also, this emphasis on this healthcare crisis, right? So our baby boomers are entering retirement. They're going to need more healthcare, right? That is the crisis. So we're really focused on the age, right? This group of individuals, but we're not focused on social determinants of health at all, right? So we could definitely see people that, are needing an increase in care, but is it age or is it where they're living, right? Their access to, a walkable environment, their access to proper healthcare, their access to nutrition and good food, right? So really, is it that they're aging, or is that these other, social determinants of health are really impacting our healthcare system now? Right. So that's something that's, definitely for us to think about. Physicians could dismiss something that's treatable as a feature of old age, like, oh, you're getting older. now. So, this is what you should expect, right? You should expect to feel this way. You're older. I think women too could potentially be experiencing this. This is, going through menopause, perimenopause, right? This is just how it is, right? It's not fixable. It's not treatable. Um, and then also providers that could be treating the natural effects of aging as a disease, right? We could be, there could be individuals that are, come in with a certain complaint, right? And it's considered a disease instead of this is a natural aging process. We'll get more into that in a little bit too. All right, what about our community programs, right? So those are some examples in healthcare. But maybe if you're working in a community program, reflect on what you're offering and how it is structured as well. So we have community centers that maybe only offer youth and adult programs. And those community centers could have a separate part that's a senior center, right? So a good question is, why do we have senior centers? Why don't we just have community centers, and then individuals can decide what they'd like to participate in? So if someone comes in and they're a certain age, maybe, you assume, oh, you want the senior center, right? Without even asking them. Not everyone wants to play bingo at an older age, especially with our boomer population. They're really looking for opportunities to engage with others, and doing things that are going to make them healthy. So there could be individuals that are looking for a typical adult program, and not something that's being offered at a senior center. So think about how those programs, how we offer them, are structured, right? Do we have separate things at the senior center, and then we have our community centers, and maybe someone walks in the community center and you just assume, looking at them, they're older, oh, you want the senior center, without even asking them, right, how you can help them. Also, our sports facilities, right? Having access for elite athletes only. There are certainly older adults that are athletes. Maybe they're not elite, but they're still benefiting from that. We have older adults that are still participating in powerlifting. They're running marathons. They're doing even strongman competitions. So, just assuming that access is only for elite athletes when there's so many other individuals that could benefit from that. And then also talking loudly and slowly to older adults. So when someone does come into the community center, and you see that they're older, maybe they look like they're, older than 60, are you talking loudly and slowly, assuming they wouldn't be able to understand you, trying to communicate that they should be, checking out the senior center? So think about that. Think about how all of that is structured in the community, and think about the assumptions of these different populations and what they need. All right, and I can say, we may assume that bingo is for older adults, but there's certainly younger individuals too that are enjoying bingo and those types of games also. All right, so think about, are there other examples of ageism in your practice area? All right, so take a few minutes. This is the reflection part. Maybe what have you done, or what have you seen? Have you seen someone be turned away because of their age? Have you assumed someone's interests based on their age, right? Have you assumed something about someone, right? How have you spoken to them based on their age too? All right, we're going to jump into some theories because I love theories. And I promise we won't get too bogged down by these. Some of these are probably familiar to some of you, especially if you've worked with older adults or you've taken a class on aging. So first is our continuity theory, and this is actually part of several rec therapy textbooks. So this was created in 1984, and it basically says that aging success is dependent on your perception and also your ability to adapt, right? So the better you're able to adapt, and then adjust as you age, then the more successful you are going to be. And I think that's true for all individuals with everything, right? If we're able to adapt on the fly, right, more, then we're able to be more successful as well. So that's I feel like this is very pertinent to rec therapy because this is what we're doing, right? We're helping people adapt to these different things. We shouldn't assume adaptations, right? We should still treat individuals, as unique. But we certainly, need to take into account that adapting for certain situations, it's not just for aging, it's for anyone, right? As we're moving through the life course, as we're going through different experiences. We have our successful aging. This one you might be familiar with. So basically, states that avoiding disease and disability will lead to successful aging. So there has been some critiques on this theory, because as we know, you can still, have a disease, you can still have a disability and still be successful in your aging. So, you can not necessarily need high cognitive functioning, right, or high physical functioning. You can still be successful as you get older. So there have been some adaptations to this theory based on that feedback. So one that some of you might relate to is terror management theory. And this is probably for individuals who, mostly aren't working with older adults. But ageism really can act as a defense mechanism, right? Because we see ourselves in older adults. Maybe we're afraid of our own mortality, right? We're afraid of getting older because generally that means moving to death, right? People can be afraid of dying, certainly. So it could be a way to separate yourself, from that experience because you're, afraid of what happens with getting older. And that could be an experience that you've had or just in general. And we think about, society and what we see in movies and the film, and we're going to discuss that on the next slide. That certainly contributes to that fear of aging. And it's an experience everyone's going to have. Why do we fear that, right? Why do we fear death? So that's another question to ask ourselves. And then we have compulsory youthfulness theory. So, excuse me. So that states that ageism and ableism and other systems of oppression intersect to produce this idea that people must remain youthful and non-disabled throughout the life course. So as we age, right, we still need to stay youthful. We still need to, right? How many times have we said, oh, well, if you're youthful at heart, then you're not getting older. Well, number one, why do I need to stay youthful at heart? And then number two, what's wrong with getting older, right? So there's this focus on remaining young. And we see that. We see that in advertising. We see that in movies. There is this real push for us to stay young, right? We're, as a culture, we're obsessed with youth. Think about the shows that are on. A majority of them, have younger individuals, right? When we think of reality TV, that's really had a big boom, right? We don't see many older adults. It's usually, younger adults. So there really is this focus on staying young. And that is a perfect segue to stereotype embodiment theory. So this states that those stereotypes that we have about aging, they're internalized starting in childhood. So it's operating unconsciously, so that means it's implicit bias. And we're learning that being older, right, isn't necessarily a good thing. So when we think about TV and specifically TV or movies that are made for kids, right? So we'll chat about cartoons and animation. If you're older, you might remember Mr. Magoo, right? And Mr. Magoo, he was always bumping into things. He couldn't see, he couldn't hear. And so really we were introduced to an older gentleman that had, some type of limitations that were intended to be funny, right? So certainly we laugh about it, but then as children, that's developing how we feel about older adults. The same with our Disney cartoons, right? So we can thank Disney for our implicit bias when it comes to age and also gender. So on the left, we have our evil queen, and she is from Snow White. And, what's her character, right? Her character is basically being obsessed with Snow White, being jealous of her beauty. At least that's the original, right? So we're talking about the original cartoon that most everyone has seen this, not kind of the newer versions, right? And being obsessed with youth. All right, same with Mother Gothel. So in the middle, we have Mother Gothel. If you've seen Tangled, then you recognize her. Her character was completely based on staying young. So she needed Rapunzel's hair because there was magic that kept her youthful. And so she even kidnapped a child to have this power, held her hostage, essentially. And then when she could not have that power anymore, she just failed to exist. She turned into dust. So we see these roles. I mean, we could get more into the fact that Disney, really likes to create roles like this for women, which is a whole other presentation. But we see these individuals when we're younger, how people are being presented. We do have some newer movies that, do show older adults. So we do see in Moana, her grandmother as well, but part of the kind of the moving the story along requires her to pass away, and how that impacts Moana and how she's able to move on to her quest. And then also Coco. So we see Coco, and again, at the end, the happy ending is that Coco has passed away. So there really is, even though there's an increase in becoming more diverse with these storylines, we're still seeing, how old age is, progressing the storyline of younger individuals as well. Okay. All right. So what does this do? So we've talked about how we could have implicit age bias and also explicit age bias, but how does this really impact us, right? So we know this is potentially happening, right? What can it do to us? It can really change how we view ourselves and how we think of ourselves, right? So think about the survey that you took earlier, right? The expectations regarding aging, it's not just for other people. Those expectations are for yourself as well. So if there was more negative expectations or less expectations, right? With your survey, right? Those expectations are on yourself. So it changes how we view ourselves, right? Well, I'm older now, I can't do that. I'm too old for that. Maybe not, telling yourself you can't participate in the things that you've always participated in the past because you can't do it as well, right? So I used to have residents who refuse to paint or refuse to draw because they can't do it as well as they used to, right? So, definitely maybe you can't do it as well as you used to, but that joy is still there. So it can change how we feel about ourselves. It can really impact negatively generations. And I think we see this pitting of generations against each other, like baby boomers against millennials, Gen Z's in there too. So there's really this pitting of generations based on age, is ruining this opportunity to, have more of a community, right? And because of that, it's devaluing this ability to benefit from younger populations and older populations, right? What each can contribute, because each is unique and what they can contribute is different and it's still of value. So it's going to limit that, right? So if we, feel that baby boomers, all of them don't know what they're talking about, and, they can't, do for themselves, and they're the reason we're having this healthcare crisis and, everything else, we're not looking at the value that they can also bring to society. Ageism can also be associated with earlier death. So, I mean, think about it. If you yourself are putting limitations on what you can do, and, you're feeling sorry about getting older and all these things, and, we're not as active and not adapting, then sure. I mean, it makes sense, right? You're looking at, definitely more medical concerns as well. It can lead to poorer mental and physical health, probably increased depression as well, and slower recovery from any type of disability in older age. So if you're feeling, yep, this happened to me because I'm older, maybe you're not doing as much to regain that strength or that ability that you once had. It could be with, physical therapy or occupational therapy. Individuals may say, oh, I'm old, I'm just not going to that. I'm just not going to do that. So ageism can really impact how we live our lives, right? And, how long we're able to age. So this is a nice quote. So I want to include this. Belonging is a pervasive human need that is vital to our well-being as we age. Ageist attitudes, stereotyping, and life transitions tend to jeopardize older adults' experiences of belonging, right? So think about that. Some of you that are older might, have had those feelings of not belonging because of your age. We know that certainly happens in the workforce. So whether it's implicit or explicit, these thoughts and views that we have on aging that are contributing to stereotyping can really jeopardize relationships that we have, right? And it's really important for people to belong, right? Sense of belonging is so important for health. Okay, so one more theory, I promise. This is the last one. Productive aging. All right, so productive aging theory is great because it focuses on shifting away from those negative stereotypes. So all the things that we've learned when we were little, thank you, Disney, everything we're seeing, in advertising, we're shifting away from those negative stereotypes, and we're really focusing on what older adults can contribute to society. And we do know after retirement is really important for people to, I don't want to say stay busy, but pursue different activities that are meaningful for them. So maybe it's working part-time, something different, maybe it's volunteering. Some of you that are working now and maybe are close to retirement, maybe not even close to retirement, might already have a plan. Thinking, after I am able to retire, I'm going to work part-time at the gym, right? Or I'm going to volunteer at a cat shelter. So some people might, say, oh, that'd be nice for me, to do. So it's important to be able to still pursue things that bring you joy. And also, view older adults as a resource. So yes, they are retired. They're still able to contribute, and they contribute in ways that younger individuals can't. And it could be time commitment or time of day. They can be, certainly productive still to our society. So productive aging is a really important theory in changing the way that we view older adults and how they can contribute to society. All right, so I like to add a little bit about cultural humility in this presentation because ageism and aging is part of that. So a lot of you probably have had some type of cultural competence training, right? So cultural competence is gaining knowledge about different cultures, learning about their strengths, and then also developing cultural awareness. How do I view different individuals who are different from me? How do I interact with others? I'm learning about different cultures. I'm learning about different things, how and how I should embrace differences, right? Essentially. The next step above that is cultural humility. So cultural humility takes everything that we're still doing with cultural competence, right? And learning and growing and kind of that self-reflection, but then the next step is holding those systems accountable, right? So how can you work on an institutional level to ensure that there's inclusion, there's equity where you work? Understanding and addressing those power imbalances. And I mentioned how in long-term care, there's power imbalances, right? There are people caring for, others who are dependent on them being kind to them and caring for them. So how can I use my understanding of my own beliefs, right, to work to disrupt these inequitable systems, right, especially power imbalances as well. So cultural humility is kind of the next step with that. And a lot of times cultural competence is focused on race or ethnicity, but it also includes age. It also includes, gender identity. There's, certainly different areas where we can apply these concepts, and aging is one of them. So I really like to include this as a way to look at age as culture, because it is. When we're looking at culture as lived experiences, age is part of that. It certainly is, right? So how can we, as a question for everyone, how can we hold systems accountable? How can we, maybe it's just realizing that we have some policies that, are ageist. And I'll give you another example in long-term care, because again, that's my background. We had policies that, looking back were, somewhat detrimental to our residents. So we would have residents that would come in, and maybe they came in on a Friday, and one of our policies was that they would need to be assessed by PT or OT before they're able to walk on their own or use a walker. So it was policy that everyone that's coming in would be using a wheelchair. So someone who was coming from home and was able to walk, they haven't been assessed yet, they're given a wheelchair. So that means that, maybe they're not able to be seen until Monday, right? Depending on scheduling, they're in a wheelchair all weekend. If they haven't been walking all weekend, or maybe not exercising at all, that's going to be detrimental to their ability, right? So we think about how important it is to move and walk and do all these things. Kind of we say like, use it or lose it. Someone who might be a little bit more frail is coming in, and then we want to keep them safe. That's why we have this policy. But in turn, we could be taking away some of their ability, right? That's just an example. Another example I like to use is the policy we had to weigh individuals on a weekly basis. So generally, right, if you're weighing someone, then you want to ensure that, they are receiving all the nutrition that they need. Sometimes weight loss can be a trigger for other things that are happening. But what about individuals, especially women who have had issues with eating disorders? And we'll go back to our society and expectations of women to remain youthful, to remain thin, to do all these certain things. And for our older generation that maybe wasn't able to break free from that as much as our younger generations are doing now, that could be detrimental. I knew a resident who she was weighed every week. There wasn't any reason why, as far as her diagnosis, why that should happen. And she was at risk. It was just something that we did for every resident. And she stopped eating because she didn't like the number on the scale. So she was putting herself on a diet and not eating as much as she should, because they were weighing her every week. Because again, it was policy, and they were trying to keep everyone safe, and they wanted to try and keep on top of potential issues. But again, her diagnosis definitely wasn't, her weight loss, not, anything would be a trigger for anything else. So those are just some examples of ways to hold systems accountable, right? So questioning the policies. Why do we have this in place? Does it make sense for everyone? Okay, so here is a self-assessment. All right, so you can pause and look at these a little bit further. Think about how you're supporting residents, being able to live meaningful lives, right? Have meaningful experiences with the community, and then also in healthcare. What are we doing to really encourage that? So I encourage you to take some time to reflect on these questions, even possibly journal. So if you're thinking that you really want to dive deeper into this and your own implicit bias, this is a great way, some great statements or cues to really start that process, right? So think about what you're specifically doing, to dismantle ageism. All right, and we're going to get into why is this important, right? Anti-ageism, is that part of our ATRA code of ethics, right? That's the question, and the answer is yes. So anti-ageism can be part of our number one and number two, our code of ethics. So our first one, beneficence, recreation therapy personnel shall treat persons served in an ethical manner by actively making efforts to provide for the well-being, by maximizing possible benefits, and relieving, lessening, and minimizing possible harm. So we know that ageism is harmful, right? So not just for the people that we are caring for, but also for ourselves and the community at large, right? It's harmful. So this can certainly be considered anti-ageism can be considered part of that. And then also justice. Recreation therapy personnel are responsible for ensuring that individuals are served fairly and that there's equity in the distribution of services, right? Are we at all times acting fairly? Are we at all times distributing services equally? Are we able to do that if we're not aware of our implicit bias uh, it is in regards to aging, right? So individuals should receive services without regard to race, color, creed, gender, sexual orientation, age, right? Disease, disability, social and financial status, right? So again, are we making assumptions about our clients' needs based on their age, right? Are we only offering services, certain programming because of their age and what we think they would like? Right? Are we, not offering a certain thing because we might think they're too old for that? That would be a red flag for us. All right, so our anti-ageism strategies, these are just some suggestions of what we can do as providers to combat ageism. And I realize this is certainly more implicit, right? So what we're doing in this presentation or what's been presented, I do realize that individuals face ageism in their jobs. Certainly, but this is a way that we can promote anti-ageism for our clients and hopefully will in turn impact policies that are also impacting older recreation therapists. So using appropriate terminology first. So older adult is a preferred term actually over senior. And I believe we're moving away from geriatric and elder. So using older adult, that's more of a preferred term. Being able to gain accurate perspective of older adults, like what they're able to do. And then that can really impact and improve our attitudes towards aging, right? So moving towards more positive attitudes. Why don't we involve our clients in planning and decision making, right? Especially in community centers, right? Do you have voices of older adults, that are helping you guide the programs that you're providing? Exploring the needs and interests of older adults in respect to physical activity, and then designing programs accordingly. So not assuming that because someone's of a certain age, they're not able to do X, Y, and Z, right? There are certainly some very athletic older adults who are looking for opportunities to stay active. Providing more inclusive active living opportunities that are accommodating that intergenerational interaction. And that's to benefit older adults and also younger children as well, right? So that's something that we can do, I think, specifically rec therapists. We do a lot of intergenerational programming, and that's a great way for our younger generations to really dismantle any type of, ageist programming or ageist animation that they've, seen or been exposed to. It's a great way to really promote anti-ageism between multiple generations. And then taking a strength-based approach. We are strength-based as a profession, which is great. Sometimes we're more strength-based towards individuals, and we don't take the opportunity to reflect on our own thoughts, which impacts how we are approaching that strength-based approach. And hopefully that makes sense. I've explained that in a way that makes sense, right? So it's important for us to practice reflexivity so we're aware of our own biases and how that could impact how we're taking that strength-based approach. So yes, we do. We look at individuals and we are providing accommodations, we're providing programming based on those individuals. But in some cases with our group programming, or maybe even with some of our individuals, we might not even think to do certain things because of that implicit bias, right? So again, we have the best interests in mind. We certainly aren't doing things on purpose to harm individuals, but our implicit bias could be. All right, so let's go back to our test. So you had your 12 item Expectations regarding aging test. And look at those answers again. Maybe after this presentation, there's some things that you'd like to change, which is fine because hopefully this has, given you a chance to really reflect on your thoughts about older adults. So the way to score, there's directions on the second page on how to score the survey. But really what I do is, I encourage my students to, add up the points. And I will say that implicit bias, it's very hard to kind of determine, to score implicit bias. We can't say, yes, you're ageist, or no, you're not ageist. So the higher the score you have, then the more expectations you have regarding aging, which could be for others and yourself. And the lower the score, right, the lower your expectations of aging. So if you have a very low score, then you have lower expectations of for individuals, right? Because of their age, which could impact the quality of life for yourself and for other people. So I will say, the higher the score, the less likely you have, implicit ageism. But it's certainly still something to reflect on, right? And by no means, again, will this say, yes, you're ageist, no, you're not ageist, but it starts that conversation. And again, because it's really hard to determine someone's bias based on one quiz, right, essentially. So this is just a starting point for you. Okay, and I just want to leave you with a quote: aging is not lost youth, but a new stage of opportunity and strength, right? And that's from Betty Friedman. So again, I'm really hoping that this has caused some thinking based on your, thinking or reflecting based on experiences with aging. And that's really the intention, right? So reflection is really important in this process. And also, understanding where maybe those thoughts, those implicit thoughts even came from, which was important for me. And I'm still reflecting on things. This isn't, you reflect for a week and then you figure it all out. It's a process, right? It's like cultural humility. It's a process. When we're looking at how to disrupt those different, policies and power imbalances that are in place, something that you work towards and something you work towards for yourself. And again, I worked in long-term care for 18 years and I, still had age bias, which I wasn't even aware of. So, it's okay. It's fine. Implicit bias, you're not aware, generally of of you doing certain things, but it's certainly impacting your behaviors towards other individuals, to older individuals. So thank you all for spending some time with me to learn about anti-ageism strategies and recreation therapy. My information is on the screen. So if you'd like to reach out for, to have a conversation or some more information, or you'd like the slideshow, just let me know. Again, I am at Southern Connecticut State University. And I hope you have a wonderful new year. Everyone stay safe and reflect, reflect, reflect.